The rain was relentless, hammering the roof of the car as I pulled into the gravel driveway of the Airbnb, my headlights cutting through the storm's gray haze. I was 26, alone, and running though from what? I wasn't entirely sure. By the time I reached the porch of the small, cedar-shingled house in Asheville, North Carolina, my heart was pounding louder than the thunder. The door swung open before I could knock, and there he was, Ethan, my host, all easy charm and disarming warmth. Mid-20s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold a story he wasn't ready to tell. He stood in a faded blue sweater, holding a steaming mug. "You must be Caleb," he said, his voice low, like he was sharing a secret with the rain. I nodded, drenched and shivering, already feeling like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't prepared for. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and coffee, a cozy refuge from the storm. Ethan handed me a towel, his fingers brushing mine for a split second, enough to make my pulse spike. "Rough night to travel," he said, gesturing to the couch. I sank into it, grateful but hyper-aware of his presence as he sat across from me, legs crossed, studying me with a curiosity that felt too intimate for a stranger. The storm outside roared, but in that moment, the real chaos was brewing inside me. I'd booked this place on a whim, desperate for a break from my life in Chicago, where every day felt like a performance. I was a graphic designer, good at crafting perfect images for clients, but terrible at facing my own truths. Growing up in a small Midwest town, I'd learned to bury parts of myself, parts that stirred when Ethan leaned forward, asking, "So, what brings you to Asheville?" His tone wasn't just polite. It was searching, like he could see the weight I carried. I mumbled something about needing a change of scenery, but his gaze didn't waver. "Fair enough," he said, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "This town's good for that. Resets the soul." I wanted to laugh it off, but something in his voice made me believe he meant it. We talked for hours about art, music, the way the mountains looked at dusk. He was a painter, he said, though he hadn't sold much. "I paint what I feel," he told me, his eyes locking with mine. "Not what people expect." The clock ticked past midnight, and the storm hadn't let up. Ethan offered me a glass of wine, and I accepted, though I knew it was a bad idea. My life back home was a mess of half-truth dates with women I didn't love, family dinners where I dodged questions about settling down. I'd never let myself explore what I really wanted. But sitting there, with Ethan's laugh filling the room, I felt a pull I couldn't ignore. "You're quiet all of a sudden," he said, setting his glass down. The air between us thickened, charged with something unspoken. I wanted to tell him I was scared not of him, but of what he made me feel. Instead, I asked about the paintings on the walls, vibrant abstracts that seemed to pulse with emotion. He stood, motioning for me to follow him to a small studio at the back of the house. The room was a chaos of color canvases stacked against walls, paint tubes scattered on a wooden table. One painting caught my eye, two figures, blurred but intertwined, their edges bleeding into each other like they were one. "That's my favorite," Ethan said, standing closer than necessary. "It's about letting go, trusting someone enough to blur the lines." His voice was soft, but it hit me like a freight train. I turned to him, our faces inches apart. My heart was a drumbeat, loud and unsteady. "What if you're not ready to let go?" I asked, barely a whisper. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought he might close the distance. But he stepped back, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. "Then you wait," he said, "until you are." Back in the living room, the storm still raged, but the silence between us was louder. I wanted to ask him to stay, to keep talking, to keep unraveling whatever this was. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. As I climbed the stairs to the guest room, his words echoed in my mind, trusting someone enough to blur the lines. I didn't sleep that night. The rain, Ethan's voice, the weight of my own unspoken truths, they kept me awake, replaying what might happen if I let myself fall. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the guest room's window, painting the wooden floor gold. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Ethan's words from last night looping in my head, trusting someone enough to blur the lines. It felt like a dare, one I wasn't sure I could accept. Downstairs, the smell of fresh coffee pulled me from my thoughts. Ethan was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with a focus that made me smile despite myself. He wore a plain white t-shirt, his hair still messy from sleep, and when he saw me, his grin was effortless. "Morning, runaway," he teased, sliding a plate toward me. The nickname stung, but not in a bad way. It was like he already knew me better than I wanted to admit. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving the world sharp and vibrant. Ethan suggested a hike in the Blue Ridge Mountains, saying it was the best way to see Asheville. I agreed, partly because I wanted to clear my head, partly because I wasn't ready to leave his orbit. The trail was steep, winding through pines and wildflowers, the air crisp with the promise of fall. Ethan moved with ease, pointing out hidden streams and rare birds, his enthusiasm infectious. "You ever feel like nature knows something we don't?" he asked, pausing at a lookout where the mountains stretched endless and blue. I shrugged, but his question lingered. I'd spent so long hiding from myself. I'd forgotten how to listen to anything deeper. Halfway up, we stopped by a creek, the water rushing over smooth stones. Ethan sat on a boulder, sketching the scene in a small notebook. I watched him, the way his pencil moved with purpose, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're staring," he said without looking up, a smirk in his voice. "Caught," I laughed, heat creeping up my neck. "Just wondering what you see in all this," I said, gesturing to the creek. He set the notebook down, his eyes meeting mine. "Possibility," he said simply. "Every line, every shadow, it's a choice. You decide what to keep, what to let go." There it was again, that quiet challenge in his words. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my phone buzzed a text from my sister, asking when I'd be back in Chicago. Reality crashed in, reminding me of the life I'd left behind, the one I wasn't sure I could return to. That night, back at the Airbnb, Ethan cooked dinner: roasted vegetables and grilled chicken. Simple but perfect. We sat at the small dining table, the candlelight flickering between us. He told me about growing up in Asheville, about coming out to his family at 17, the way his dad hadn't spoken to him for a year. "It hurt," he said, his voice steady but raw. "But it taught me to choose myself, even when it's hard." I envied his courage, the way he wore his truth like a badge. I told him about Chicago, about the pressure to be the son my parents wanted: stable, straight, predictable. "I don't even know who I am sometimes," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Ethan leaned forward, his hand inches from mine on the table. "You're here now?" he said. "That's a start." After dinner, we moved to the porch, the night air cool and heavy with the scent of pine. He played a soft acoustic song on his phone, and we sat on the steps, shoulders brushing. I felt it again, that pull, that terrifying, exhilarating edge. "You ever take a risk you weren't sure you'd survive?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Every day," he said. "But the best ones, they're worth it." The moment stretched, fragile and electric. I could have kissed him then, could have let the lines blur, But fear clawed at me, the weight of years spent hiding. I stood, mumbling something about being tired, and retreated to my room. Alone, I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart racing. Ethan was downstairs, just a staircase away, but the distance felt like miles. What was I so afraid of? And why did it feel like everything was about to change? The third day in Asheville dawned with a clarity that felt almost cruel. I woke to the sound of birds, my mind still tangled in the almost moment from the porch. Ethan's words, "The best ones are worth it," taunted me, daring me to be brave. He was already up, sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by sketches. "Morning," he said, glancing up with a smile that made my chest ache. "Want to help me pick which ones to show at the gallery?" I nodded, grateful for the distraction. We spent the morning sorting through his work, each piece a window into his soul-bold strokes. Quiet moments, raw emotion. One sketch stopped me cold, a lone figure under a stormy sky, reaching for something just out of grasp. "That's you," he said softly, watching my reaction. "Or how you looked when you got here." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever seen me like that, not even myself. We worked in silence after that, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that felt like understanding. By noon, we'd chosen 10 pieces, and Ethan suggested celebrating with a trip to a local brewery. "You can't leave Asheville without trying the craft beer," he said, his grin boyish and irresistible. The brewery was crowded, alive with laughter and clinking glasses. We found a corner table, and as the afternoon blurred into evening, the conversation turned personal again. Ethan asked about my dreams, the ones I'd buried under expectations. I told him about wanting to design album covers, to create something that felt alive, not just polished. He listened like every word mattered, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're allowed to want things, Caleb," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Even if they scare you." I swallowed hard, the beer suddenly bitter. I wanted to tell him he was one of those things, that being near him made me question everything I'd ever known about myself. But the words stayed locked inside, heavy and unspoken. Back at the house, the air felt different, thicker, charged. Ethan suggested a movie, and we settled on the couch, closer than we'd been before. The film was some indie drama, but I barely noticed it. All I could focus on was the heat of his arm next to mine, the way his laugh vibrated through me. Halfway through, he turned to me, his face serious. "You're leaving in a few days, aren't you?" The question hit like a punch. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah. Back to Chicago." He looked away, his jaw tight, and I hated myself for the distance I'd put between us. "You could stay," he said, almost too quiet to hear. "Just a little longer." My heart stopped. It wasn't just about the Airbnb, it was an invitation, a risk, a chance to be someone new. I didn't answer. Not then. The movie played on, but the tension between us was its own story. When it ended, Ethan stood, stretching, his shirt lifting just enough to reveal a sliver of skin. My breath caught, and I looked away, terrified he'd see the want in my eyes. "Good night, Caleb," he said, his voice soft but heavy with something unsaid. He lingered for a moment, like he was waiting for me to speak, to act, to do anything. Upstairs, I paced the guest room, my mind a storm. I thought of my life in Chicago, the safe, suffocating routine, the lies I told to keep everyone happy. Then I thought of Ethan, his courage, his art, the way he made me feel seen. I wanted to be that brave, to take the risk he'd talked about. But every time I got close, fear pulled me back. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon over the mountains, wondering if I could ever be the man Ethan saw in that sketch. The one reaching, not running. The one who wasn't afraid to blur the lines. By the fourth day, I was unraveling. Every moment with Ethan felt like a step toward a cliff, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to jump or run. He was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, humming to himself as he chopped vegetables for lunch. The normalcy of Ithaces. His warmth made my chest tighten. How could someone so open make me feel so exposed? "Let's do something different today," he said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "There's a festival downtown. Music, food, art. You in?" His eyes sparkled with mischief, and I couldn't say no, even if I wanted to. We walked to the festival, the streets of Asheville buzzing with Life Street performers, food trucks, couples holding hands. I envied their ease, the way they didn't seem to carry the weight I did. At the festival, Ethan was in his element, chatting with local artists, introducing me like I was more than just a guest. A band played on a small stage, the music raw and soulful, and Ethan grabbed my hand, pulling me into the crowd. "Dance with me," he said, half laughing, half serious. I froze, hyper-aware of the eyes around us, but his grip was steady, grounding. For a moment, I let myself move with him, the music drowning out my fear. His smile was radiant, and I felt a spark, a possibility I'd never dared to name. We wandered to an art booth, where Ethan bought a small print of a starry sky. "For you," he said, handing it to me. "Something to remember Asheville by?" I took it, my fingers trembling. I didn't want a print to remember this place. I wanted him. This feeling. The version of myself I was starting to glimpse. That night, back at the house, we sat on the porch again, the print resting between us. The air was warm, the crickets loud, and I felt the weight of my silence. "Why do you do this?" I asked suddenly. "Host strangers. Let them into your life like this." Ethan leaned back, staring at the stars. "Because people are stories," he said. "And sometimes, you meet one worth reading." His words hit hard, and I felt the dam inside me crack. "I'm not sure I'm a good story," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I've spent so long pretending. I don't know what's real anymore." Ethan turned to me, his eyes fierce. "You're real right now," he said. "Thesis. He writes real. Don't run from it." I wanted to kiss him, to let go of the fear, but the weight of my past held me back. My parents' voices, my friends' expectations, the life I'd built on lies, they were chains I couldn't break. "I don't know how," I whispered. Ethan reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. "You start small," he said. "One truth at a time." He didn't push, didn't force me to say more. We sat there, hands clasped, the night wrapping around us like a promise. When he finally let go, I felt the loss like a physical ache. Upstairs, I lay awake, the print of the starry sky on the nightstand. I traced its edges, thinking of Ethan's words, his touch, the life I could have if I was brave enough to claim it. The fifth day felt like a turning point, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way Ethan looked at me over breakfast, like he was waiting for me to decide something. Maybe it was the way my own heart refused to stay quiet anymore. Either way, I knew I was running out of time. We spent the morning at a local bookstore, a cramped, cozy place with creaky floors and shelves that smelled of old paper. Ethan pulled books from the stacks, reading passages aloud with a passion that made me forget the world outside. One was a poem about love as a leap, a risk that could break you or make you whole. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice soft but piercing. I mumbled something vague, but inside, I was reeling. "Love is a leap." That's what this felt like. A free fall I wasn't sure I'd survive. We walked back to the house, the air heavy with the threat of another storm. Ethan was quieter than usual. His usual spark dimmed. "You okay?" I asked, and he shrugged, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "Just thinking about how fast this week's gone," he said. "Feels like I just met you." And now, he trailed off, but I knew what he meant. My departure loomed like a shadow, darkening everything. That evening, he suggested painting together. "Nothing serious," he said, setting up easels in his studio. "Just play." I'd never painted before, but with Ethan guiding my hand, showing me how to mix colors, it felt natural. Our brushes moved in silence, the only sound the soft patter of rain outside. My canvas was a mess of blues and grays, but Ethan called it honest. "It's you," he said, smiling. "A little chaotic, but beautiful." The word beautiful hung in the air, and I felt my walls crumble. I set my brush down, turning to him. "Why are you so kind to me?" I asked, my voice raw. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "Because I see you, Caleb. Not the version you show the world. The real you." His hand brushed my cheek, and I didn't pull away. For the first time, I leaned into it, letting myself feel the warmth, the truth, the terrifying possibility of him. We didn't kiss. Not then. But we stood there, inches apart, the air electric with what could be. The rain pounded harder, and Ethan laughed, breaking the tension. "Storm's back," he said, but his eyes said something else. "Stay. Don't run." We cleaned up in silence, the moment lingering like a half-finished painting. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the canvas I'd painted. It wasn't just colors, it was me, messy and raw, the way Ethan saw me. I thought of the poem, of love as a leap. I was so close to jumping, but fear still held me back. What would happen if I told him the truth? That I was falling for him, that he was rewriting every rule I'd lived by. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying, and I didn't know which would win. On the 6th day, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I was tired of running, tired of hiding. Ethan was downstairs, sketching again, his focus so intense it made my heart ache. "Sleep okay?" he asked, glancing up. I nodded, but my mind was screaming, "I'm falling for you, and it's tearing me apart." We drove to a nearby lake, the water mirror smooth under a cloudy sky. Ethan rented a small rowboat, and we glided across the lake, the world quiet except for the dip of oars. "This is my favorite place," he said, his voice soft. No noise, no expectations, just space. I understood. Out here, I could almost forget the life waiting for me in Chicago, the one I wasn't sure I could go back to. We docked on a small island, spreading a blanket for a picnic. Ethan had packed sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, and we ate in silence, the weight of the week settling between us. "What happens when you leave?" he asked suddenly, his eyes fixed on the water. The question was a knife, sharp and precise. I wanted to say I'd stay, that I'd choose him, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I told him about the first time I realized I might not be straight. I was 15, watching a teammate at soccer practice, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't name. I'd buried it, convinced myself it was a phase. But sitting there with Ethan, it felt like a truth I couldn't ignore. He listened, his hand resting near mine on the blanket. "That's a heavy thing to carry alone," he said. "You don't have to anymore." His words broke something in me. I reached for his hand, my fingers trembling. He didn't pull away, just squeezed back, his touch an anchor. "I'm scared," I admitted, tears stinging my eyes. of what this means, of what happens next. Ethan's gaze was steady, unwavering. You don't have to have it all figured out, he said. Just be honest. With me. With yourself. We rode back as the sun set, the sky blazing orange and pink. Back at the house, Ethan lit a fire in the living room, and we sat on the floor, sharing a bottle of whiskey. The warmth of the fire, the burn of the drink, it all blurred into the heat of his presence. I don't want to leave, I said finally, the words spilling out like a confession. Ethan's eyes softened, and he leaned closer, his breath warm against my cheek. Then don't, he whispered. We kissed then, slow and tentative at first, then deeper, like we were making up for lost time. It was everything terrifying, exhilarating, real. When we pulled apart, I was shaking, but not from fear. For the first time, I felt free. We stayed there, tangled together by the fire, the world outside fading away. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, this was enough. The seventh day was a blur of joy and dread. After last night's kiss, everything felt different, brighter, sharper, but also fragile, like a dream I might wake from. Ethan was quieter that morning, but his touches were gently, a hand on my shoulder, a brush of fingers as he passed me coffee. Each one sent my heart racing, a reminder of what I'd let myself feel. We spent the day exploring Asheville's art scene, wandering through galleries and studios. Ethan's passion for art was contagious, and I found myself imagining a life where I could create like he did, unapologetically. At one gallery, he introduced me to a friend, a sculptor named Mia, who eyed us with a knowing smile. You two look good together, she said, and I felt my face burn. Ethan just laughed, but his hand found mine, a quiet claim. Back at the house, we cooked dinner together, moving around the kitchen like we'd done it 100 times. It felt so easy, so right, but the clock was ticking. Tomorrow, I was supposed to leave. The thought made my stomach churn. Over dinner, Ethan asked about my plans, his voice careful. You going back to Chicago for good? He asked, poking at his food. I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted to stay, to build something with him. But Chicago was my real job, my family, the life I'd built on half-truths. I don't know, I said honestly. I've never felt like this before. Like I could be, me. Ethan's eyes softened, but there was pain there too. You deserve that, Caleb, he said. Wherever you are. That night, we sat on the couch, closer than ever, the tension between us a living thing. I told him about my fears losing my family, my job, the safety of my old life. He listened, his hand resting on my knee, his presence a steady anchor. You can't live for other people, he said. Not forever. It'll break you. His words were a mirror, reflecting the truth I'd been avoiding. I kissed him again, harder this time, desperate to hold on to this feeling. We didn't stop, moving to his bedroom, our hands and hearts tangled in a way that felt like a promise. Afterward, we lay together, the moonlight streaming through the window, and I knew I was in love. Not just with Ethan, but with the person I was becoming with him. But love wasn't enough. Not yet. As I lay there, his breathing soft beside me, I thought of the life waiting for me. Could I leave it behind? Could I be brave enough to choose this? To choose him? The questions kept me awake, even as Ethan slept, his arm draped over me like he was afraid I'd disappear. The final morning broke with a quiet that felt like heartbreak. I woke in Ethan's bed, his warmth beside me, and for a moment, I let myself pretend this could be my life. But my bags were packed, my car waiting, and Chicago loomed like a storm I couldn't outrun. Ethan was already up, making coffee, his movements slow, deliberate. "You don't have to go," he said, not looking at me. His voice was steady, but I heard the crack in it. I wanted to say I'd stay, that I'd choose him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I hugged him, holding on like he was the only thing keeping me grounded. We sat on the porch one last time, the air cool and heavy with the scent of rain. "You changed me," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't know I could feel like this." Ethan's eyes were wet, but he smiled. "You were always this person, Caleb. You just needed someone to see it." He handed me the notebook from the first night, the one with "Love is worth the risk" written inside. "Keep this," he said, "and don't forget." I drove away with tears in my eyes, the mountains blurring in my rearview mirror. Back in Chicago, life resumed: work, family, the same old routine. But it wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. Ethan's words, his touch, the person I'd been with him, they lived in me, a fire I couldn't extinguish. Weeks later, I called my parents and told them the truth. It was messy, painful, but it was honest. I quit my job, started freelancing, designing album covers like I'd always dreamed. And I wrote to Ethan, telling him I was coming back, not as a guest, but as someone ready to leap. When I returned to Asheville, he was waiting on the porch, his smile brighter than the sun. We didn't know what the future held, but we knew we'd face it together. That week, that risk, that lovey, it was worth it. And what happened after midnight still replays in my mind, not as a memory, but as the moment I chose to live.